Hello everyone and welcome back to Knights of the Pageless Library. This is an audiobook discussion podcast. I am Ryan Knight and I will be your host for this episode. Today I'm taking a look at Helldivers, written by Nicholas Sansbury Smith and narrated by R.C. Bray. This Helldivers should not be confused with the video game Helldivers of the same name, which came out in 2015. I have no idea if the game and the book are related in any way, as Helldivers, the novel, came out a year later after Helldivers, the game. I should mention, though, that Helldivers 2 has been announced, and you should definitely be looking forward to that one. If you haven't played the first one, go do that as well. But I'm going to move on now because this episode is not about the game, as much as I would love to talk about it. This episode is about the book. If you have anything to say about this book, or anything else really, please feel free to email us. kotpl.pod@gmail.com is the easiest way to get a hold of us. Or just do a quick Google search for Knights of the Pageless Library. It's a pretty unique name. Nobody else has it. You'll find us all over the place at this point. Just want to start off by saying thank you to anyone who's listening. I greatly appreciate it. Just a quick reminder that we are knights, we are not pirates. So please do not steal audiobooks. Please pay for them and do the creators the best you can to get them their comeuppance, if you will, for creating such great entertainment for all of us. And with that little, PSA out of the way, let's get into this one. So as I said, this book was written, I believe the book itself was written in 2016, as well as the audiobook was published by Blackstone Audio in 2016 as well. Nicholas Sansbury Smith has a plethora of books under his belt, over 50 titles on Audible alone, and it looks like he kind of sticks with this military sci-fi thriller type of books. That's not necessarily what this book is about, but I'll talk about that here in a little bit. Just want to let you know that he does have a lot of books, so if you have come across this title maybe, or you want to check out some other stuff in that category, maybe Nicholas Sansbury Smith has something that's right up your alley. Quite a few of the books are actually narrated by Bronson Pinchot, so if you've been listening to us for any amount of time, you'll know how I feel about that one. And, go back and listen to our episode where we got to talk to Bronson Pinchot, which was an amazing experience. So how about the narrator, R.C. Bray? Pretty sure his name has come up before on this podcast because R.C. Bray is a titan in the industry, I would say. He has over 400 titles under his belt on Audible alone, let alone probably anywhere else you could find him. And R.C. Bray is an incredible voice actor. He does a great job, and this book is no exception. He does an incredible job in this one. The book itself is pretty dark and dreary, and R.C. Bray really kind of brings that to the front. He does a great job with all the characters in this book. You get quite a few different ones, so you get a lot of different tonality, you get a lot of different situations, you get a lot of different stuff out of this book, and R.C. Bray really hits home on this one. He definitely adds to this book. I don't want to give away too much about how I feel about this book right now, but I will say that R.C. Bray brings his A game on this one and does this book a great service. You get to listen to R.C. Bray narrate for just over 10 hours and 11 minutes in this one. And I should mention, this is the first in a series of books. So Helldivers is book 1 of the Helldivers series. And while I was listening to it, I wondered how far this series could possibly go. And the answer to that is right around 13 books. I was shocked when I pulled this one up, found out it was part of a series, started looking at the series, and found out that it is still being written actually right now. Nicholas Sansbury Smith is writing these, and they will be coming out. I believe there's a book like 1.5 and book 13, book 12 in the actual series. I'm going to say it wrong now. Book 1.5 as well as book 11 are also coming out both this year in 2023 is what it looks like. So very impressive. And we'll see if I continue with this one. I will do my best to kind of portray my thoughts on it, and maybe this will be something you're interested in, I guess, if you want a, large amount of content for you to be able to soak up. I don't know if I mentioned it yet, but I listened to this title through Audible. We've had this one, I think, in our library for a while. As I said, came out in 2016. I don't know when it got added to the library, I've scrolled past it a few times and just never taken the time to listen to it. So you could check out this book for free if you signed up for an Audible Plus membership. We keep sending everybody to Audible, and I've said this before and I'll say it again. If you have a better place that you think is superior to Audible in many ways to download audiobooks, please share that with me. I would like to share that with everybody else in the audience as well, because Audible right now for us is just the most convenient way as we share it as a family, so works out really good, like I said before, unless they pull a Netflix and they say, nope, can't do that anymore. Only one person at a time on any one given account. But if you were to maybe want to try Audible and you wanted to download this for free, you could do that, or you could purchase it for $24.47. All right, I'll get into the big ones now. Is this book easy to follow? In many ways, yes. The story is pretty straightforward. It is well written. It is well paced. The imagery is well written in terms of really painting a good picture. So I will say that those parts of it are easy to follow. The only thing that I say is probably not super easy to follow is you're going to jump quite a few different characters, and we basically have multiple stories going on at the same time that make up the overarching story. But Ryan, I hear you say, that's how most stories work, you idiot. And yeah, you'd be right. I think the big difference with this one, though, that I actually really liked is that we get these multiple different perspectives that are all kind of coming from... It's almost to me like you're looking at a triangle, where all the stories have their own little starting places at the bottom, and they all kind of meet and culminate together at the very top. And I think it was very well done in that regard. I think each story was kind of unique and interesting in its own way. Not necessarily too many twists and turns in this one, but, a good enough amount to keep me engaged, without giving away, too much spoilers, or giving away my recommendation on this one. And is this one easy listening? Obviously, yes. With R.C. Bray on this one, I feel like he really, truly, nails this one and really keeps this one engaging from start to finish. I don't know of a ton of other narrators, actually, that I would have picked for this one. I felt like he embodied each character individually perfectly, and I have zero complaints about his performance. So with all of that being said, what do I think about the story and the book overall, and would I recommend it? Yes, I absolutely would recommend this one. I could almost recommend this to anyone. If you are a fan of any kind of sci-fi stuff, this book could definitely be right up your alley. I know I didn't really talk about what the book is about at all yet. I don't want to spoil too much of it because I want you to actually listen to this one. It is a post-apocalyptic story that is centered around the idea that humanity has ruined the planet, and the only surviving humans at this point live in airships above the ruined world. The world is completely covered in radiation, storms, mutants, and things like that these ships, the only way they can survive is by sending these helldivers down to the surface to get supplies to bring back to keep the ships running. It's got a little bit of everything, actually, in the story, too, and I appreciate a lot of it. So, with all that stuff out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and pass the spoiler wall now. I'll talk about the story in detail as best as I can. So, if you don't want any of it spoiled for you, then please pause the podcast now. Go download this one, listen to it. I would highly recommend it to most people. Even if you're not a huge sci-fi fan, I think this one's got a little bit of everything to it. So, let me know what you guys think too. Please send me an email. Let me know what you thought, or leave a comment, on whatever you're listening to. Let me know what you think. So with that, here we go, passing the spoiler wall. So Helldivers starts off with us meeting our main character, Xavier Rodriguez, better known as X. That's pretty much what he'll be known as through most of the book. And Xavier X is getting ready to do a dive. And we get an idea of kind of what a dive is. And we also are filled in that most divers only survive about 15 dives. And Xavier is about to do something like his 96th dive or something like that. So he is one of the most experienced, if not the most experienced, diver in the world. He dives with a team of 4 members This dive is supposed to be particularly easy because they're supposed to be going into a green zone, which I'm assuming means, low radiation, things like that. And it's supposed to be a nice day. As X gets into his chute tube, I can't remember exactly what the verbiage is that they use, but as he gets into his tube to launch, he realizes that as he's kind of looking down, that the sky, there's some lightning in the sky, and just as he's trying to knock to tell them to delay the launch, he's dropped, him and his team. We find out very quickly why he wanted the launch delayed, because as they're dropping, they're dropping like you would think of a skydiver dropping. They have what I imagine is also kind of like a wingsuit type thing that they use to kind of steer themselves on their way down. And a couple of his teammates are struck by lightning, like right off the bat. I think one of the teammates is struck by lightning. And then one of his, come to find out later, but one of the guys that was talking to him right before they dropped, Aaron, who is one of his really good friends, I believe he gets all the way down through the storm. They make it through the storm clouds and things like that. But he deploys his chute and it doesn't deploy correctly, and he ends up crashing into a building. And basically, everybody except X dies very quickly. X is down on the surface, and what they're looking for is more nuclear fuel cells to bring back to the Hive, which is what their ship is called. It was known as the Persephone when it was built, but over time its name has changed to the Hive because of the way I'm assuming the way the inner workings of the ship kind of work with the people inside and things like that. I believe it's at this point too that X he hears some strange noises that he feels like he's never heard in all of his many, many drops. And he ends up finding out that it's coming from these strange humanoid kind of creatures that I think he's never seen up to this point. And I don't know if it's because of the area they're in, if it's an area maybe they haven't dropped in a long time. I'm assuming that's what it is, that he's never seen these creatures, because we're going to find out here soon that they are extremely prevalent. The sound that X has been hearing is this weird noise that these creatures make, and eventually they end up calling them sirens, because it almost sounds like alarm klaxons and high-pitched wailing and things like that are the sounds a siren might make that we are used to hearing. These creatures have no eyes. They're easily drawn to X when he lands, and they obviously are extremely aggressive in trying to get to him and trying to kill him. We'll find out a little bit later as to why. X returns to the ship, and he's extremely mad at the captain for not delaying the launch, because he thought that they should have known better, that they were being dropped into a storm. And the captain, Ash, she decides that she tells him that they had a faulty sensor. But he knows that they could have easily just looked and saw that they were getting close to being over the top of the storm. Basically, he lost his whole team, his team of good friends. He's seen hundreds and hundreds of people die. But Aaron, I think, was extremely close to it. So now, X also had promised Aaron before this dive that he would now look after Aaron's son, Tin. They call him Tin. That's not his actual name, but he wears like a tinfoil hat, and it's because he's like 10 years old, but he's also extremely smart, and he's also kind of a nervous, young kid, and he wears the hat, I think, because he says it blocks out. His dad told him it would block out, the insults and things like that other kids threw at him. But now X has to go explain to Tin, what happened, that his dad is dead and that he will now be living with X. We also find out in very short order too that Ash, the captain of the ship, she has throat cancer, and she refuses to step down as captain and seek treatment until she has found a safe place to land the ship for humanity's sake. Now, we don't find this out for a while, but basically what's going on here is that these ships, there's only two left. There's the Hive, which is where this story takes place, and then there's also Ares, which is its sister ship, which is identical, I think, in most ways. These ships originally, though, were built to be used as means of deploying bombs onto the planet, and they are nuclear powered, but they're basically like giant blimps or zeppelins, essentially, is kind of not necessarily what I'm picturing, but how they work. It's a combination of nuclear power generators and engines combined with, helium to keep them afloat as well. But we find out later that these two ships have been floating for around 250 years. So that's kind of insane. And I have a little bit of a problem with that, just because I'm a mechanic and I know there's very few things that would last anywhere near that long, especially if your resources are extremely limited. But then again, that's the point of the story, is that they obviously have to send these people back down onto the hell that we as humans created on Earth to get resources in order to keep these ships afloat for the rest of humanity's sake, because there is nowhere on the surface, as far as they can tell, that is habitable anymore by humans. X mentions to the captain as well about the creatures that he saw that he has never seen before. We also find out too that we get some grumblings too that the crew, is very much so divided. And I say crew, but in reality, everybody on board is part of the crew because they can't go anywhere else. They're definitely divided into class systems, upper deckers and lower deckers, and the people who live in the lower decks are very subject to cancer, flu, things like that, because the living conditions in the lower decks is very not great, let's say. With the radiation that comes off of the nuclear, reactors and things, because they're so close to their living quarters down there, which is why there's such a high rate of cancer. And at one of these points, X runs into a lower decker who we got a little glimpse to that there's these guys, this guy that X runs into, Travis, is trying to kind of incite some rebellion among the lower deckers against the upper deck people, because they don't think that the conditions are fair that they have to live in. Now, the multiple kind of legs of the story that I was talking about in the beginning are basically, most of this is going to be about X, but we're going to jump around from X to Tin to Ash and to Travis are the main kind of story. Oh, and one more character that we're going to meet here shortly that kind of are all going to culminate together by the end of the overarching story. We end up meeting this other character because the Hive receives a message from Ares, the sister ship, and they receive an SOS. Because apparently they went to this place, which they're not... That's the thing, I don't think they're all that far away from each other, so the Hive was kind of close to receive this message. Anyways, Ares has gone to this place known as Hades, which is where the company who originally built the ships was located before all hell broke loose. It's pretty much the most inhospitable place on the planet because of what went down there. Essentially, like, all these bombs and stuff were dropped there, making it an extremely inhospitable place. The electrical storms in that area are the worst compared to anywhere else that they've been on the planet. But because the company who built the ships was there, they know that there have to be resources for the ships somewhere in that area. So that's why the captain of the Ares decided that he needed to go there. We don't really get a whole lot of information as to like what was going on the Ares at the time, but what we do get information about is that they do send a Helldiver team of their own into Hades, and that's where our other character comes in, and that character is Weaver. And I don't know, in the beginning X had mentioned that supposedly there was another Helldiver on the Ares that had nearly as many jumps as him. I don't know if that's this guy, and I don't even know if it's ever brought up how many dives he has. But he's also an extremely experienced diver, and he ends up diving with his team, and only him and one other diver are actually able to land on the surface in this area, this Hades. And they're immediately accosted by the same creatures, the sirens, that X had seen as well. His other teammate is killed, and then we change perspectives, so we don't exactly know what happens to him right away on the surface. X ends up putting together a new team of divers for himself that he will need to take, they say train, but it doesn't sound like there's much training in this job. It's all hands-on. There's not a whole lot of stuff to read, I don't imagine that you can learn a whole lot by reading about skydiving, essentially, especially skydiving through, lightning storms and into nearly pitch blackness and things like that. The technology and stuff in this book, too, is a bit advanced, and I should have mentioned in the beginning that they do a good job of, they'll say things like, he looks at his HUD, and then it explains that that's a heads-up display, but it only explains it once, and then, they expect you to remember that. Or his NVGs, his night vision goggles, things like that. So Their technology is relatively advanced. You know, they have like a mini map essentially that they can pull up on their heads-up display inside their helmets. So the ship can drop specific places for them to go to once they're on the ground. Usually also a supply crate is dropped with the divers at the same time. The supply crate rarely ever lands anywhere close to where the divers end up landing because of the winds and things like that. Captain Ash makes up her mind that she is going to go help the Ares, even though, you know, a lot of people are bucking back against her for doing that because they're going over to Hades, which is, you know, like I said, the worst place on the planet. So they're worried that, you know, something might happen to their ship. Remember, only 2 remaining ships on the planet, at least as far as I know in this book, with roughly about 1,000 people between the 2 of them total. So 1,000 people left on Earth, and she's, you know, essentially they're going to risk a lot by even going anywhere near that area. It all ends up going really bad, really fast. They end up getting over by Hades shortly after the Ares crashes down to Earth and is destroyed. Everyone on board is killed. Unfortunately, Weaver witnesses this all from the ground. His entire family is killed while he stands there and watches the ship crash. And shortly after the ship crashes, the sirens come out and they start going nuts. And apparently there are flying sirens as well that have bat wing type things and stuff. And they come out and they start devouring the corpses. But the weird thing is that Weaver notices pretty quick is that if they take the batteries out of their suits and essentially power their suits down, you know, power down displays and things like that, the sirens will actually leave them alone. And almost as if they're drawn to the electrical impulses and things like that being put off by their suit, and less the fact that they are made of flesh for them to eat. Once the hive gets close to Hades, they decide that they still do need to do a drop, unfortunately, because too much of their ship ends up being damaged in a storm on the way there. So they still do have to drop Helldivers in. They decide to drop them into a area a little further away first to see if they can retrieve things that they might be able to use without actually going directly into the heart of Hades. And it's on this drop that Xavier with his new team, I believe 2 of which die, or 1, I think 1 dies on this next drop out of the 4. Either way, they're able to retrieve a map. And the map is actually of the inner workings kind of the area there in the heart of Hades, which leads them to believe they will be able to find the resources they need. But in order to do that, Captain Ash will have to drop all 3 remaining Helldiver teams at once simultaneously. They're basically going to gamble it all, right? They're going to drop all these men and women in order to try to get themselves the resources and the repair items they need to keep the ship afloat. Once X and, you know, his remaining team members make it back, it is decided that they will drop into the heart of Hades, unfortunately. Especially once that they have that map to go off of. They are dropped into the heart of Hades, but right before they are dropped, X hears something that he's never heard before, and he hears gunshots on board the Ares. Or, excuse me, on board the Hive. And I mean, he's never heard it before, I think, on board. It sounds like, you know, when they had the riots and stuff like that, the food riots, that there was probably gunshots. But it's obviously something that's very stupid to do on board an airship. Right before his tube is dropped. And essentially what happens is the lower deckers, Travis, who is upset that his dad was also a Helldiver who was killed, and his brother is in prison for being part of the food riots a few years back, and he's been in prison for quite a while. So Travis, with another group of 3 other guys, apparently at one point they hid away this assault rifle on board the ship. They were actually able to hide it away too, due to Captain Ash's attempts at helping lower deckers get the treatment that they need by not being so harsh on them and not searching their shops and things like that. So these guys figured out they could actually hide these assault rifles, and she was no longer sending militia in to search them. She was thinking that it would make for better relations between upper and lower deckers. And you can imagine an assault rifle or a gun of any kind really on board a ship with helium bags essentially would probably be a really, really stupid thing to fire. These guys end up killing one of the engineers that's with Tin, and then they take Tin hostage. And basically what they do is they go to the farms They take Tin and the farmers hostage, and they're holding them hostage during the dive until Captain Ash meets their demands. And their demands are basically equal rights, if not better rights, for lower decker people compared to upper decker people. So now, we're jumping perspectives quite a bit because we're jumping from X on the ground, we're jumping to Captain Ash trying to deal with all this bullshit going on up on the ship. We're jumping to Travis, who quickly realizes that these guys he got together with to do this are not good guys. Nobody was supposed to get hurt with what they're doing. The goal was just to basically scare Captain Ash into giving up some stuff for them. Tin ends up getting punched in the face by one of these dudes to the point where it knocks him out, knocks him unconscious. And then we're also getting Tin's perspective because Tin realizes something is wrong with the ship. And what's wrong with the ship is after these guys shoot some of their bullets like crazy assholes, they poke a hole in one of the gas bags. Now there's a lot of the gas bags, but with the ones that are already damaged from the storm, and they poke a hole in this one, plus the reactors that are damaged, plus I think they're like relief valves or something like that are damaged. Essentially the ship can't even keep itself afloat, so starts descending. We've been getting hints throughout this whole thing that Tin, even though he's only 10, is actually extremely smart when it comes to anything engineering related. He can fix things really well, he can take them apart, he can put them back together. Like, that's what he wants to do. He wants to be an engineer on this ship. And while X is on the ground, when they finally landed, basically they find out that the entire area in Hades was taken over by these siren creatures. Once they're down there, they end up meeting up with Weaver because he comes out and he's essentially been hiding this whole time from these monsters by, staying unplugged, staying quiet, things like that. He comes out, he takes some of their supplies, but they end up meeting up with him. Basically, they say they don't have a choice. Like, they gotta get the supplies, otherwise the hive is gonna sink as well, and then all of humanity is doomed. And that's actually one of the sayings that the divers always say, is that they dive so humanity may live, essentially. They end up losing almost everybody out of the 12-man team that dived, I believe, in the beginning. I think X and 2 other girls survive, as well as Weaver. Weaver does end up surviving. They end up running and gunning through a ton of these freaking creatures because this is essentially like the hive for these creatures, not the hive, the ship. It's like where these creatures kind of spawn and they mate and things like that, and where they are coming from, which I think is why they're running into them now for the first time, because like I said, I think they've never done a dive into Hades because they knew it basically is suicide if they were to try to dive into it. Tin ends up escaping from Travis and his other guys, and he ends up actually going into the helium pod, I think, and fixing the leak himself because the terrorist guys essentially refuse to let any other engineers in to fix the problem. So Tin knows that it has to be done. He escapes and does it himself. And unfortunately, the 2 of the guys, Travis and the guy who was psycho and punched Tin out and stuff, they end up fighting with each other. And this dude ends up stabbing Travis. Then the militia, which is basically their police force on board the ship, ends up breaking in. And they use crossbows because crossbows are safe enough that obviously they can harm people, but they're not strong enough to punch through the sides of the walls and things like that to end up damaging the ship. Unfortunately, they bust in and they kill all 4 of these guys. Travis being killed by his friend, and then his friend being killed by militia members. It's pretty dark. Tin ends up with Captain Ash and asking her, if X is coming back, and she sure hopes so. They sent them to their death, unfortunately. X does end up sending back the resources they needed. They send back, I believe, multiple fuel cells, which they've already discussed. The fuel cells can keep the ship running for decades, basically. And it's not like a couple days worth of supplies. This stuff lasts a long time. They send that stuff back, and then Weaver and the 2 remaining girls, as well as X, end up deploying they deploy these really cool helium balloons that float them back up to the ship, and then the ship ends up retrieving them in midair. But as they're going up, one of the gals gets this entire swarm of these sirens is chasing them, and X realizes she's not going to make it. These things are going to get to her before she can make it back to the ship, so he ends up going towards them with his gun, kind of guns blazing, and basically putting himself right into the swarm of these things. So Weaver and the two gals end up making it back to the ship, but X ends up falling all the way back to the surface with these things. He fights his way back out, and I'm a little hazy on exactly how he does it, but he ends up being able to deploy another balloon, and he gets back up into the air. But he realizes once he reaches up above the clouds, and they get all the way up above the clouds, like to where you can see the sun. Apparently where they normally float is in the clouds all the time, so they rarely ever see the sun. But as he gets up above the clouds, he realizes that the hive is already a ways away, and he can't radio them anymore. The book actually ends with him just kind of relaxing up in the sun as he sees the hive going away from him. Now, the ending really wasn't my favorite part of the book. The ending was extremely disappointing, but it also is kind of setting up, obviously, for the future of the series, because we had some survivors and we had a lot of characters kind of built up throughout this story. You know, Tin being one of them, and Tin has decided towards the end that he wants to be a helldiver. He doesn't want to be an engineer anymore. He wants to be a helldiver like his dad and like X were. Now, I sold this book extremely short. I want to try to keep these summaries a little bit more short and concise as best I can. Again, please feel free to contact me and let me know if you want me to do a much more in-depth analysis of these things. I would be happy to do that if there's interest in that. But for the sake of everybody's time, you know, I'll try to keep these short but to the point. Again, I think I sold this one extremely short. I think you should listen to it for yourself and experience it for yourself in order to get the full picture, obviously. And don't let me ruin it because I did a really shitty job of summarizing it. There's a lot of setups and payoffs in this book, I believe. A lot of subtle details that, you know, are mentioned towards the beginning and then get brought up later or get, you know, come full circle towards the end of the story, which is actually really good. I'm kind of excited now that I found out this is an extremely long and still ongoing series. I might pursue this series further. I do think it would be something I'd be interested in doing, so let me know what your guys' thoughts are on that, and let me know if you've read Helldivers, what you thought of it, or if you've listened to the whole series, and if you think it's something I should definitely keep going with, let me know that. I would greatly appreciate your thoughts. I also think this would make it an extremely good HBO show, Netflix series, Hulu, Prime. There's so many of them to choose from now, but any of them could easily pick this up and have a ton of content to make an extremely long show with. Like, what are you doing? Now, maybe the series gets bad afterwards, I don't know. Maybe I'll figure that out in the future, but either way, this first book alone is easily enough content to make a season of some show, you know, 8 episodes or whatever. Either way, come on, Netflix, Hulu, get on this. And with that, I'm going to try to keep this one pretty short, so thank you everybody for listening. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate any of the support that I get. It really means a lot to me. So with that, I hope to catch you guys in the next one.